Good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. Tracy's given me some echoes. So this is something that we do every Monday at 3 o'clock to figure out what the future is for smart buildings or smarter buildings. The profiles of panelists are on mondaylive.org. And the most important thing here is to just to note that the views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do get involved in this conversation on the Zoom chat. The last few weeks have been really phenomenal on that front, so we want to continue that. This slide deck and all of the links on it is actually on the homepage of mondaylive.org. So if you want any of the links that shown here, just head over there and you'll find it. So this is the last week of February as far as we're concerned, and we're talking about delivering smarter buildings. Our agenda today is we'll have our normal chit chat, then we'll talk about delivering smarter buildings, and we want to focus on the middle 4 layers of the smarter stack: delivery, apps, exchange, and data. So we'll get to that and hopefully have some really good conversations. But before we dive into that, I'm going to hand it over to Ken for some thoughts.
Thanks, Anto. We've just got our March issue online, and the theme is Women Creating Amazing Opportunities, and dovetails in with Women's Day, which is in March. We do this as an annual feature, and we think it's important to feature the women in our industry, because I believe that's how we entice more women into our industry. And I think that's our quickest, some of our quickest people to market are the women that have been supporting in the backgrounds and think they need to come into the foreground. Anyway, we've got some great comments, and I just maybe highlight those. In some of the articles, I just pulled out some words that kind of caught my attention. There is nothing more inspiring than working for a company with strong female leadership. So that's an interesting one. Repurposing passion. Follow your passions rather than slogging through with what you're supposed to do. What good advice. I think we all need that. I was real pleased to see this. Equity is the goal we strive for, in the latest episode of ASHRAE podcast. So that was nice to see ASHRAE supporting the effort as well, and also working on the same project to involve more people in our industry. And this one was an interesting one. It's from a women's point of view. Artificial intelligence puts a mirror in front of us to show us our biases and human I can't say that.
Frailties.
Frailties, thank you. I was going to say it, but I was going to say it wrong. Anyway, I think that's something we all have to think a little bit more about. As artificial intelligence learns from us, it's going to learn all the bad stuff we do too. So we got to clean up our act before artificial intelligence starts imitating what we're doing. So I think that's kind of something we have to keep in mind. And the migration has left many employers scrambling, trying to figure out how to attract and retain talent. And Skip has given us an article on that as well. So getting people into our industry is cardinal, and we all need to make that our mission. Back to you.
Thank you.
There was an interesting exercise, Ken, on that artificial intelligence putting a mirror in front of us with Microsoft, where they attempted to make an AI engine to go through job applicants and searching for the ideal candidates. They had to turn it off in the end. It became so biased in how it was selecting people that it wasn't Microsoft. Sorry, it was Google. It became so Amazon. Sorry, Scott, you're right. Became so biased in the end of the day that it proved to be worthless.
Yeah, and it's a problem. We don't realize that just little things, make big changes.
Yeah, cool. So John, over to you.
Yeah, two things. One, I'm going to do a repeat notice to everybody about Haystack Connect 2022 virtual event, May 10th through 12th. No cost, easy to attend, community coming together to talk about the progress in semantic modeling of buildings. So I just wanted to put that up there one more time. But anyways, the other news item was this announcement by the Army on their climate strategy. Encourage everybody who's involved in buildings to click on that link and look, because my immediate reaction was, okay, this is going to be all around equipment, right? But actually, if you review their very brief summary at the beginning of the document, heavily weighted towards facilities, improving their facilities. I found that encouraging because, as we've talked about, it's so much easier for people to get their head around, buying a piece of equipment that consumes less energy than the last one, right? As opposed to the hard work of making buildings more efficient, consume less energy, and more sustainable. So a very encouraging article or white paper about the Army's climate strategy, especially how it relates to their building stock.
Cool, thank you. Mark, you're up next. You're muted.
So kind of dovetailing on the climate strategy, what John just said about the Army, which I did read it. It's a very good read, by the way. Here's something I found about how the US and the EU are getting together on this whole idea of the climate and sustainability, which is good, because I think we need more people who are together so that people will act quicker, faster, and obviously a lot alike. And one of the interesting things that they tie to this is the whole retrofit case of modernizing buildings to reduce emissions and improve IAQ and so forth and so on, but also tied it toward the jobs and economic growth, which I thought was interesting, not just doing climate stuff for the sake of it, but there are other benefits. And I think that's something that we as an industry need to take a look at as well. So when you get a chance, take a look at it. Back to you.
Thank you. Anno.
Yeah, I guess this is a bit of a theme today then, building on that as well. If you guys aren't familiar, there's a website called UNISU. I'm not sure. UNISU stands for Uniscore for sustainability. They actually post a lot of great reports on sustainability initiatives. If you haven't seen it, it's kind of interesting. They do a lot of good free reports. This is actually one of them that you can go get. They rank the 2022 prop tech companies top 10, which I find it's interesting since we only just into March, but that's okay. So a couple of interesting breakdowns in the report. It's a freebie, so you can download it yourself. If you can look at the technology breakdown, still a big focus on big data and artificial intelligence, as we were just covering with Ken. So that's kind of fascinating. I'm still of the opinion there's a lot of artificial intelligence stickers being applied to technologies. That's not really AI. You can see the business type breakdown, heavy on B2B prop tech, which is still the big space. And then the funding, which I've kind of been tracking over the last few months. You can see 2021 was a huge funding impact, comparable, just a bit under what 2017 was, although the average funding in 2021 was a lot higher. So, and my take on all this is that I think this is interesting technology that will become relevant and available, in the not too distant future, which is changing a lot of ways that we operate. Back to you.
Thank you. And I decided to put a very busy slide. Today saw the release of an IPCC report. So there's been a lot written about that. And I picked up on two. One is in the New York Times talking about adapting to the changes, and one from the Washington Post talking about what the US is going to look, not just the US, what certain places are going to look like in the future. Interesting narrative, but obviously this is getting serious, and pretty much all of our comments had some relationship to sort of the changes that's going on around us. So I thought that was interesting. Any other thoughts from anyone before we move on?
I would have thought you would have referenced the control trends report, Anto.
I would have thought you would have referenced it.
I should have. Next time.
Okay, just in case all of you are wondering what Anna and I were talking about, maybe somebody can put a link on the chat to the control trends piece. It was very interesting about the coalition session at the AHR, so that would be very useful. Thank you. So moving on then, just as a reminder, thank you, Anna. Just a reminder, tomorrow we have this kickoff of the Division 2525 weekly check-in. The idea is over the course of March and April, we want to convene this group to figure out how to move forward and do all of the necessary things to organize this material, to write and organize and disseminate it. And we're going to have a kickoff on that tomorrow at noon Eastern. Please do join us for that. We do need help. We, meaning all of us, need a lot of help to put this together. And it's not just help writing the specifications, which is a critical part of it, but organizing it, organizing all of the people, and doing all of the things that's necessary to make sure that we actually create a really sort of good body of work that can be open source and be used by others. I don't know if anybody else want to opine on this before we move on. I think we're good. So hope to see you tomorrow. This is the last show in February. We're going to move on to March as of next week with a theme of how this industry is sort of being reconfigured or is reconfiguring itself. So I think that's going to be interesting. We have some interesting thoughts and speakers lined up for that. So for this week, delivering smart buildings, we're talking about these 4 layers in the middle of the stack: delivery, apps, exchange, and data. So I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to bring up another share in a minute, but maybe we can open up the conversation. And I suggest what we do is we actually start at the bottom, start with the data, because that's, if anything, is the most tangible thing that we can think of here. And then we can spend 10 minutes or so going up the stack, as it were. So thoughts about data from the group?
One of my hot ones, of course, is always when we normally talk about data, most people just focus in on the time series aspect of it and forget about the whole metadata, description of it, which is just as important, which is a good plug for the up and coming Haystack conference, as it turns out. So I think it's always easy to forget the metadata piece and how as important that is to the when we talk about data. And it's one of the areas that, back on my hobby horse a little bit about IT type industries breaking into the space. It's the challenge that everyone really has, right? Time series data is very easy to store and manipulate and search and filter and sort and do all sorts of wondrous things, but it means nothing unless you know what that data is all about, right? And what's its purpose.
Yeah, that's a great comment, because it is, I think this is part of our whole industry in the world learning about how to use data, that, the raw sensor values are helpful, but not if we don't have the context of what they're related to. It's been a big part of the messaging we've worked on in Haystack and other organizations are working on, because it's, the analogy I make is, numbers have no meaning without units, and we don't think about it because we never deal with numbers without units. So you don't necessarily bump up against that until you try to take data out of a system without any descriptive information, then it becomes painfully clear, right? So yeah, that's a key part of the whole data thing, and I think that's really important to point out, so that we ended up on the definitions page to help people understand what we're talking about.
One of the interesting, this is a fun fact, one of the interesting things I always run across when you try to explain metadata to, especially to new people into the space, one of the things that gets thrown at me is that, well, we understand that as far as the old BAS systems are concerned, but the new IoT guys, right, they're doing such a wonderful job, and it must be a lot better. And one of the slides I have is a slide of Nest thermostats metadata tags. It's a fun one to have a look at. So they've decided to recall set point, what we've all known as set point for years and years and years. They've decided to recall that as target temperature C underscores. And one of the things we notice is IoTs actually are making it more complex. Everyone is deciding to, recreate new ones.
I'd like to ask what we've been doing wrong over the last 10 to 20 years. I mean, John has been, rolling the boulder up the hill on Haystack for a long time now, and others were even before that. The question is, why are we having so much trouble breaking through to these new people and new entrants and explaining the importance of this topic?
That's a great, I'll just answer that with some of the anecdotal things I've encountered over the years, right? One goes to a topic we've talked about numerous times, Jim, is the capital cycle that people won't upgrade. Okay, this wasn't thought of in the design of the controller and the software and the firmware in 2020. Nobody thought you needed to add a place to add metadata context. And we're not going to upgrade, right? So we can't take advantage of new capabilities. So I'm going to stay with, my 1996 Nextel phone. Right. Right. That's a key part of it. But I think one of the other things is just the understanding when you live inside a silo. Okay, all I do is work with my BAS manufacturer, ABCD, right? It doesn't hit you in the face because when you pull up a screen, you know what the stuff is. Well, even in the background, there was some type of method of organizing the data, classifying the data, giving it something. It wasn't based on a standard. In many cases, it was not viewable, exportable, reachable in any other way. But I guess, kind of in a way, it lulled the user into a kind of sense of complacency, like, well, I know what it is, right? And when you get hit with trying to work with data, as we all have been, as we try to integrate systems, connect new value-added systems, you're encountering something that in most cases you didn't have to encounter before. And what does that take? Time and education,
Right.
I'd add, to me, one of the things I've noticed over the years, and as you all know, I've been involved with Haystack as well, is that the data that we are able to identify, access, manipulate, normalize, all the stuff we all do, whether Haystack or not, is the building itself is taken for granted. I walk into my building, temperature's fine, light's fine, whatever. And I think that's the problem, where people are not associating the value that data can actually do for a building. Still, even though we've talked about it till we're all blue in the face, it's the typical building is taken for granted. The lights work and temperature's fine. I'm not going to worry about anything. Let's move on.
My own take on it is that a lot of people that have come into the space over the time have had a lot of IT background. And if you look at the common semantics and ontology in traditional IT, it's all taken for granted. It's things that are known about, the English language, photography, pictures, accounting. They're all based into the basics of how we all understand numbers and symbols. But this idea of what I call physical world analytics, actually creating physical models and using it, that seems to be where there's a big disconnect. because there is a difference in understanding about the backgrounds of what we do with the data and what data we need to collect to implement and understand those physical models.
Yeah, Mike, I
So-
think you're right on, actually. I think that's our industry has to, like by definition, has to get into the weeds to do what we do. So, and there isn't a temperature sensor as a simple example, space temp, right? Where does that show up in the IT world? It doesn't. So they've never had to contend with representing that data in a uniform manner. So when they started doing, images as an example, JPEGs and PNGs, they settled on 3 or 4 different file standards, and everybody decided to support all those standards. So pretty much doesn't matter which one you pick, they're going to be able to support it. But in our case, there hasn't been any effort to do that, and so whether it's the point that was made, I think, John, you made the point about the person in the building, as long as they can see the data they need to do their job, they're happy. They're not thinking the big picture. And the very reason we're having today's call is we recognize the fallacy or the inadequacy of that way of thinking. We actually have to change the thinking. We have to be forward looking. We've realized that if we're going to get to be interoperable, we've got to think through the whole problem and specify the solution, if you will, to the whole problem, so that the people who come behind us know what they need to do to make it work. We've never set the bar.
I
Never set the bar
with you, but the one thing I would differ on is that, a bunch of us have been working on those models in this background for 30 years, with basically starting with interoperable data definitions inside of BAT, the Lawnmark profiles, followed on by Haystack over the years. So we've done a lot of work, but we seem to have done a really crappy job of educating the new entrants as to what that body of work already is.
I think, but part of the problem, Jim, just coming back to you, why hasn't it been successful? In a lot of ways, we've almost done it to ourselves. I mean, if anybody who's programmed any standard building automation system out there, Honeywell, Johnson, Siemens, Schneider, that the only place that I can put any descriptor of what I'm talking about in that thermostat is a 16-character limit of, if I'm really lucky, 32-character limit space, right? And so we've become very, very creative over time in putting all sorts of information into those 16 or 32 characters, right? But when you look at the IT guys, when you specify a photograph, the amount of fields and data that you can enter in that describes that photograph is overwhelming, right? And so in a lot of ways, we kind of shot ourselves in the foot by limiting the amount of places that we can put useful information in the very first place.
Yeah.
And it's still today. I mean, it still happens in the BA systems today.
Most of the systems don't allow you to capture the necessary
right.
semantic data where you should when you create the point. I want to follow up on a point about that Jim made about the IT side, because this has actually happened in the last 3 weeks or so. Was involved with a customer, and their IT staff was involved. And to make a long story short, they were incredulous. And basically, for a while, did not believe me. They thought that they could connect to a Modbus meter, and just by connecting, it would bring in all the descriptive information about what the Modbus registers meant. They had never encountered it before. One of them actually said, "I don't know what this Modbus stuff is, but when I connect to a device," well, he's thinking an IT device, right? And he's going to get a manifest like as soon as he connects, and it took careful time no, you're not going to get that when you connect to a Modbus device. And at the beginning of the conversation, it was clear that, didn't believe me, because everything he or she touches comes with this nice manifest, right? So that's a big, there's a big gap there in understanding that maybe that's what, they're not listening to us when we're asking for their help, where they could come in. They'd be the ones to say, obviously you need metadata, right? But maybe the gap is they don't even believe, what's this guy going off about? Of course, any device has a manifest.
So,
but that just underscores my point, though, John, about the amount of information that I could put into a Modbus system on register. it's constrained, right? I get like
Yeah.
8 characters that I can put against a register versus, again, they're used to a JPEG and they can put all sorts of useful
Yeah.
fields and stuff. So we kind of done it to ourselves.
Well, the manufacturers did it for a reason, and I won't
Right.
say just those of us on the call did to ourselves. Why do people still use them? It's a very low cost, right?
Yeah.
Communication protocol, communication mechanism, development environment to build a product, right? Comes out of the pretty sure late 70s.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about
Right.
45-year-old technology.
Technology.
Yeah.
So
And
can
so
we,
And at
we
its
need,
time, it was leading edge, right? They haven't
Right.
been 40
we
years
need
old.
to-
Certainly was.
we
Certainly
kind of need
was.
to move on to other sort of just maybe a minute or so on other aspects of data. And what I'm thinking of is the whole sort of governance and privacy and who owns the data and all of those kind of things, which we're not going to get into in any level of detail.
Look at Brad Colts'
Yeah, Brad.
comment, which I think is a really good one. And there are a lot of what's on the data list. Start with why. Why should the owner operator value their building data? And what evidence does our industry have to prove that the value of the data is worth more than the hardware that collects the data? Very
Isn't
well
that the
said, Brad.
purpose layer though of the stack? Purpose is why, right?
Yeah.
Right here, we're trying to identify the what, aren't we?
Right.
Yes.
Well, but herein lies the problem though with that exact thing, that it seems like to me that there's a pretty big gap between those that develop the technology to collect and analyze the data and those who are on the receiving end and need to understand. They're not even sure exactly what to ask for at times, it seems like. So that interpretation between what they're getting and what it means and why that's important is where I see a huge gap right now.
Okay, well, where should we put that then?
How would I,
That
We're working on the stack, right, today?
yeah, we are. So how would I describe that? Sorry, Tracy.
Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff I think we've been talking about here for a few minutes probably falls more under the needs side, right? And part of the needs that we need to do, or things we need to do as a community, is figure out how to bridge that gap between what we can supply and what benefits come from that. Why is that important? So that interpretation of the data,
How is it used?
right?
How does it fit the purpose and all that kind of stuff?
And how about who? Because there's always differences of who uses it.
Yeah.
We'll be using different data, that's good.
So
I
maybe
think-
that's a good transition to the exchange, which is really the exchange layer is strategically placed above the data, because a key part of what the exchange layer is supposed to do is to figure out how the data gets used, how it gets exchanged or fed into applications and other things above that. So let's talk about exchange. And to me, the easiest way to think about exchanges is really the way we think about middleware in the past. That's kind of where things come together. Now, that may not be necessarily the right model for the future, but that's kind of how I tend to think about it, and just open it up for conversation.
I think one of the big ones that we do get out of the IT space is the whole context of the data lake model, right? Is that rather than try and work out ahead of time what I need and how I'm going to exchange it and the quality and of the data, let's just put it into a great big data lake, as long as it's clean, and then let anybody have at it, right? Part of the problem I have a little bit with the middleware concept is that it implies that you've got some pre-knowledge as to what you're going to do with the data. One of the things I've learned in this space is no one really knows what they're going to do with it until they've got it. We got big ideas and big bullet points, but what does it mean? And so I kind of more subscribe to the collect as much as possible and then let smart people work it out from there.
But Arno, couldn't you argue? I know I could, that middleware better positions that data to be usable because it normalizes it, it converts it from one protocol to a more usable protocol by the next user. It doesn't necessarily determine where it's going to go and how it's going to be used, but it processes the data in such a manner that it's now accessible in things like MQTT or even, if the middleware supports it, custom, drivers for any kind of an API, REST API that somebody might need. So it prepares you better than just throwing a bunch of raw data into a data lake.
There's quite a good argument to say that all of that could actually be unnecessary, and middleware was actually created in the past decades because we needed to normalize and data, and there may actually be better ways of doing that now. And I think that's what Anna was kind of referring to as it's not really the right model moving forward, but I think it's a useful model to think about this layer as kind of where data comes and gets transported or converted to be used.
And it's a little bit about that, the protocols, right? MQTT or APIs, or that's got to be all part of this discussion, I think, as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. So whatever your API infrastructure is, I think that's where it needs. This is, in my mind, this is where it lives in the Exchange.
Yeah.
Well, would it be fair to say that it's really semantic protocols that play here, because technical protocols are really for lower down? Is that fair to say that?
No, I don't think we should restrict it. You're going to get data that isn't semantically modeled, but can be brought up to these other applications as part of the Exchange layer. Apps could translate it on their own, or features in the Exchange layer could, but I wouldn't limit it to semantically modeled.
Yeah, I agree. If you look at what some apps do, it takes that simple Modbus data and applies some of what John's talking about to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's part of a stack as you go up. That's and the reality is, unless we're building and designing systems new every time we go into a building, there's a lot of installed base out there that we have to deal with going back to the 70s. Buildings stay around for a long time, to Jim's point, Modbus is 40-year-old technology. So, and it's still being deployed routinely, daily, today. And that's part of the challenge, I think, that we've had. If we were designing with a clean slate, blue ocean kind of a situation, we would probably all do it different in the controls world than we do now. But the reality is, when you want to put a $60 thermostat on the wall and collect data from it, there's not a lot of choice there in terms of technology.
Yeah, but that's where I think the IoT guys are challenging us, though, Tracy. I think they are resetting that expectation, and that they are starting to use, back to the earlier point, we're limited to 16-bit characters and 18-bit processors and all this because it's quote unquote cheap. But the IoTs,
they have something in their favor, which is scale, right?
So I need to capture that, the sort of scale part of it, the fact that we were constrained to 8 bits and therefore did crazy and innovative things, and now we don't really have to, which is really the IoT model. What is that?
The other advantage is it's all new stuff. They can start with software that has the ability to record semantic data, where we're going to connect to a building where there is no ability to do that in the native systems. You have to do it as you go through the Exchange process, maybe at the Exchange layer or in the apps.
And there's just inherent traits in the quote unquote normal IoT world, like life cycle is the life cycle expectancy is much shorter. The volume and scale just from hardware perspective is much higher. There are just things that inherent on the consumer world, let's say, compared to the buildings world or commercial world, that are just working against us.
Well, exactly right, Tracy, because I think there's a fundamental difference between the but IoT is all about data and information, right? In our world, we're all about controls, right? I mean, when we build a VOV controller, I'm going to stick it in the ceiling space and I expect it to work for, you know, the next 25, 30 years. So I'm going to pick technologies, hardware, chips, devices that I know are true and tested and thorough and have been there. And there's a fundamental difference in the concept. So if you're just doing it for information where you're not, you know, if it stops working, it's a bit of a so what. But, you know, if the VOV stops working, that's a big deal, right? Or the air handling unit or the chiller stops working, that's a big deal. So that changes the type of technologies that designers use to pick, you know, to make things work. Because once I stick it up there, it's going to be there for 25 years.
Yeah, I think we're giving the IoT guys a little too much credit here. Sorry. Okay. Ecobee has their own API. Nest has their own API. Go down the list. Okay. You want to do integration? Okay. You're not doing protocol integration. You're doing API integration, and the owner's still going to be mad at what's this cost for, John? Right.
Isn't that
So let's not say they're solving this, because they're not solving it, because they haven't come together either.
Not all of the
Okay.
problem. They're just
1000% behind John.
Yeah.
But isn't that the point, that IoT is almost unencumbered with those limitations? So they were
that was my point. Yeah.
Okay, but they're not solving the problem on their own. They're not rallying together. I missed the press release where Nest and Ecobee are working together on a unified API and unified data model. Maybe it was out there. No.
They've just given up on that part or integration at that level and just assume the world's going to integrate at the cloud level. Right?
Yeah, they're going to do it to the cloud, and it's going to cost something. Somebody's going to pay for it. And an owner's going to say, you know, why isn't this plug and play? You know.
So what are the needs of this exchange? We've talked about a lot about this.
I think there's protocols, there's gateways, there's APIs.
I think
there's a lot of it.
Legacy hardware is just in general a problem for us. We got to solve that legacy problem. That's the need, I guess.
Or use of legacy.
Yeah.
We need a uniform way to address and extract data.
Let's create another standard.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a cartoon for that.
Yes. Yet another standard. All right. I think it's time to move on to apps.
Just before we leave that, though, I think one problem, and I just heard you guys talking about, is IT is real quick to sell you a new product. Somehow we never sell anybody. We always use these 20 years. So there we're always shooting ourselves in the foot. We need to upgrade the stuff we put in there.
It's amazing how often we fall on the capital side of the balance sheet as opposed to the OpEx side of the balance sheet. That's a key difference with IT. They have ongoing funds to spend.
So is the point,
Tracy?
Is the point, Ken, that the exchange layer is where that could happen, where old and new can meet? Is that, because that's a big point.
Where does replacement? What layer does replacement come? Like,
well, that's kind of what I'm suggesting, is that a lot of it could actually come here, because an
exchange will be exchange of technology.
Exchange of information between older systems and newer systems.
What about throwing away the older system and putting in a newer system? Where does that fit?
We used to call that a dumpster retrofit. Throw everything in the dumpster and put something new on, right?
Well, yes.
Why don't you ask the building owners where that fits in terms of their budgets? And you'll have
Yeah, that's the answer.
Well, since we know that's a problem, but Jim, think about what you're doing with BACnet SC. A part of what you're looking to develop is a router that will route existing BACnet into the SC world, right? So it helps make that conversion. If I had a building with hundreds of VAV where I can't access the data, if I could buy one router, if you will, that would let me transform that data into this new data standard, that wouldn't be I wouldn't have to go up into ceilings and rip out all 200 VAV controllers. I could simply map the data into this new data appliance and keep going.
Have I got a product for you, Steve? You're spot on. I mean, that's what one of our firewall routers would do. And
Yeah.
that, your point is exactly right. So instead of looking at IoT as instead of, or look at throwing things out, look for reasonable paths, which makes sense in the economics of buildings where owners
Right.
don't have to throw away everything on the campus, and instead introduce these more modern technologies more gradually. And I think that's what we're trying to do in the market. And a lot of these protocols that we've been working on for years solve a lot of these data and semantic problems. So net, haystack, et cetera. There's huge value there
Right.
that the new entrants in the business keep losing track of.
All right, let's talk about apps. What are they?
I personally think this is one of the most important layers on the stack here. Just because of everything that we've been talking about, this is where the innovation is. Whether it be hardware or software. Because I would, by the way, does everybody else interpret apps as either hardware or software? We're talking about applications, control applications, solutions. So
It's an interesting point, Tracy, which underscores the earlier one about, BAS, we do controls, and controls needs applications, right? You don't need to do an application in IoT in that context, right? It's a dumb sensor. But yeah, in that context, yeah, I agree, hardware and software.
Anto, do we want to list the specs that we've already written, or is this just theoretical here?
I think this is theoretical, sort of what it is, just a big picture, because we don't have enough time, really. It's a time issue.
Well,
that,
you have
You know,
energy
something-
analysis as an app. You have demand response or apps that we're going to run through these architectures. You have analytics. You have greenhouse gas.
Work order.
Work orders, yeah.
Measurement,
Yeah.
verification.
a generic word that comes to mind is extrapolation. This is where that happens in interpretation, right? If we're dealing with all that legacy stuff, all the different protocols and ways that data is available to us, this is a layer that pulls it all together. Again, whether it be hardware or software.
Forensics, Anto.
Mhm.
IAQ, you can't have a conversation about
IQ.
that today.
Mhm.
Commissioning,
Safety.
safety.
Did not somebody, nobody said
Occupancy.
cybersecurity.
Yeah, occupancy, workplace management.
Mhm.
Back to Tracy's point, just a simple one, comfort,
Yeah.
maintaining.
That might, we're starting to get into the needs maybe a little bit.
Well, maybe, but I think we're also pointing out why the work we're doing is so important. This is where things are exploding, but they have to connect to the hard physical stuff over the painful protocols or APIs that need semantic modeling before you're going to get your DR to work with your occupancy and your comfort and all of those things, right? This is the problem. These things are exploding, right? And they offer great promise and hopefully benefit to people, but they run into the challenge of how do you hook them up to all the real world stuff.
Cybersecurity in there too, Anto, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really an app, but
Well,
Well,
there might be some on this call that might disagree with that.
yeah.
well, yes, there is an app
Maybe
Maybe
element.
several.
There are actually many within that topic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there are
Okay.
cybersecurity apps. Yeah, absolutely.
Is this where
So
the
what-
digital experience would?
Digital twin, yeah.
Twin experience, etc.
Mhm.
So,
I was thinking more of
what,
the
what is
occupant.
it?
I was thinking more of the occupant digital experience as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
We have
what's
occupancy.
well, I'm trying to sort of get to what's common with all of those things that is to do with going back to what John was mentioning. What's common with respect to it needs data, it needs to work with different protocols, needs to work over different times. How would you?
I'm trying to think of the word, but when I think about this layer, if as an industry, we're doing our jobs correctly at this layer, the people above this at the top, operations and so forth, it's all invisible to them, right?
Right.
They don't care about all of these problems that we were just talking about at the bottom, and no standards. And so I don't think interpretation is quite strong enough, but this is where the rubber hits the road again. What I opened with, if this industry pulls anything together, it's finding the glue right here that ties the IT world with our reality in OT, right?
So let me.
One of the interesting concepts is the sort of the difference between data and information. And one of the ways that we can think of apps is the thing that changes data into information.
Right.
Right, because information is something that can be acted upon, whereas data is just data.
Data conversion to information or something.
So let me ask this: if knowing that a lot of the data that's currently in buildings isn't directly usable because of the lack of metadata references and proper descriptors and all kinds of things, in the future, if data was properly modeled in the device right from the get-go, what would be, other than possibly a protocol, what would the exchange layer be doing? So if you modeled your data well to begin with, other than getting it from point A to point B over a wire or wireless against a known protocol, is there anything else that exchange is needed for in that world?
I don't think this is addressing what you're saying, but the other thing that's in here is this is where a great deal of infrastructure is involved, right? With housing of data and storage and everything associated with that task too.
You mean like routing through a network?
Routing, just the physical storage. The other day we went on and on about
As apps.
Azure versus AWS versus all of that stuff exists in this layer here.
Yeah, but going back to my question about data.
Yeah, I don't think I really addressed your question, Steve.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But you're right, Steve. I mean, at the end of the day, if the data in the system's at the lowest level, like a JPEG picture, if I can extract all the data that I necessarily need out of a machine, then yeah, the exchange would be nothing more than a piece of wire, right?
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure how to capture the Steve's comment. Is it the fact that information or data needs to be, the application needs to have some kind of model of using the data? Is that what you're?
No, I'm going backwards, Anto. I didn't mean to confuse this particular layer in the stack. It just got me thinking about the fact that what everybody's writing applications, and then what they bump up against is how do I get the data I need to actually inform through my application, right? So I got to get the raw data.
So
and I bump up against that problem of how do I get the data? And then that means I have to deal somehow with exchange. I got to deal with the raw data itself and all the things that we talked about in the first half an hour here.
Let me add to your question. Is this where domain knowledge gets applied?
Yes.
And that's what I keep coming back to, listening to everybody here, is all of the data, and is it usable or not usable? Well, it kind of depends on who's looking at it too, right? And that domain knowledge is a critical part. So capturing domain knowledge into the application layer here, I think, is an important part of this, what's going on here.
And just to emphasize on that, Tracy, I think we need to, the domain knowledge goes from the apps all the way down, right? I mean, it's the domain knowledge on the exchange, the protocols, APIs, BACnet, Modbus, long, down to the data layers, what we just talked about, Haystack, and the normalization, all the way to the systems and to the actual air handling units and chillers and machines that you're actually physically managing.
Even basic stuff like, what's a differential temperature mean to me? Right. What's a good differential? What's a bad differential? Kind of a thing. So That's
Yeah,
where
that's-
apps come in and start flagging and tracking and turning that into information. And that's all based on domain knowledge.
But my point is that domain knowledge has to be very, very deep, because you have to know everything from an air handling unit all the way up to how to get it, store it, manipulate it, transform it.
Maybe that's not the right model, because if the stack is about componentizing things, maybe the domain knowledge doesn't actually need to go full top to bottom. But I think we do need.
I would say domain knowledge carries through all of them.
Well, it does, but maybe different domain knowledge.
Yeah.
Maybe different pieces. So
Yeah.
we have a few minutes to talk about the delivery, which is the last layer.
Was that on this one?
I'm sorry?
Was that on this list? I forgot.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
4 middle ones: delivery, apps,
Okay.
exchange, data. So we talked about all of these different apps that in the app layer, and to me the easiest way to think about delivery is how does all of that get delivered to the people who have purpose and are actually operating.
Are we talking, just for clarification, if I recall when going through this previously, we are talking about everything from the business models like distribution and system integrators and MSIs to physical? Are we talking now, if you think about data delivery, that's a little bit different than what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think we're talking about people and technology.
Yeah.
So people being systems integrators as an example, and technology being internet.
This is when people come into the
I would
stack,
agree.
right?
I would start out with the word services. Because I think that, largely many of the value propositions that we're going to be going forward are services.
Mhm. Yeah, well, certainly you buy internet as a service, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But many of those apps are not, Tracy pointed out there may be hardware components, but most of those apps are tools. Some of them are software, so some of them are products, but the preponderance of them are services. And will be more and more services as we scroll forward into the future.
Well, maybe this is going to take us the wrong direction, but anything as a service at this point, right? Chilled air as a service, or heat as a service, or whatever it might be. That's gonna come into our industry more and more as time goes on.
No.
Is it ass?
Ass.
Ass.
It's not going to work.
I like it though.
Well, the way to actually do it is XAS.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way to do it.
All right.
So what are the issues here that's not obvious? Or that
I think one of an issue that we all face is technology is turning so quickly, and the mainstay of our industry, is kind of embedded in mechanical and equipment, and now we're layering in high technology on top of mechanical stuff.
Yeah.
And
But why is that specific to delivery? Why is that an issue for delivery?
delivering a sophisticated analytics system on top of putting a set of rooftop units on is a whole different ballgame than just putting a rooftop unit on and sticking a thermostat on it, right?
And you need both.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the other big ones that we see is we are not changing fast enough to mobile environments for these applications. I mean, everyone I'm talking to today, there's nobody sits down at a computer, and this whole dashboard concept it makes for a great sale and it's a great sizzle, but operators and the people in the field want mobile solutions. They don't want PCs and dashboards.
I
How
would
about
say
the-
that the biggest problem I see is, getting on my soapbox again, is procurement. So if you look at almost all of the things at the application layer, almost none of them are products. Most of them are processes or services. And we have no way to get people to buy those now. Although that's the delivery method that people choose. It's not how things get monetized in our industry normally.
Scooch
How about the
over, let me
change
jump
in-
on your soapbox with you for a second, Jim. That goes back to CapEx and OpEx spending. models,
Exactly,
right?
Tracy.
Sorry,
The
Mark,
other-
go ahead.
Yeah, the other piece is the IT/OT convergence or need for. So what, I'm working with an engineering firm right now who's doing some design work for data centers. And, they struggle. They're traditional MEP and they're not IT guys. And their particular customer is asking them to design the entire IT infrastructure and make it an integrated solution with the OT side. Because in the past, every OT provider did their own little network segment. And so you had 5 or 6 different answers to networking in the building. Well, that, your average MEP doesn't have the background to do IT infrastructure design. That's not what they do. They know chillers and optimization and maybe they can do cable designs, but it's a real struggle for them. And it's not their fault. It's how our industry has grown up. But all of our systems have moved to where they operate in an IT infrastructure environment, whether it be cloud or locally. They have to go through real networks and involve, routing and switching and firewalls and all of that. And our industry isn't up, they're not knowledgeable and competent in doing those things.
Yeah, but should they be? Why isn't that owner going to the right type of consultant for that design, right? Because, that to me, I'm not going to go to a tax accountant for brain surgery. I mean, you got to go to the right person, don't you?
Well, I'm just saying, John, it's a problem, right? Because I don't think owners still think in terms of the building as
Okay.
right. I'm going to build a new building and it's going to have HVAC equipment and lighting and access control. And they bring all the usual players to the table. And then somewhere along the line, they figure out, oh my gosh, there's all this IT stuff. Who's going to do that? And they hadn't really necessarily brought an IT player in from the very beginning to help marshal that through.
On chat, John Tierney bringing up the subject of digital twin, which hasn't come up. Is delivery what digital twin is?
But I thought a digital twin needs delivery in order to function. It needs to bring in the data from all the different sources. That's been my understanding.
So this is delivery is where where digital twin gets delivered.
No, I would I don't know. To me, digital twin is an app, right? To me, my understanding is delivery is how we putting this to people. We're system integrators, software as a service, those types of things. How we delivering the end result to the people. So that was my understanding, but maybe John Tierney can clarify or correct us here.
Yeah, but unfortunately, we are past
Yeah,
4 o'clock.
That too, huh? That too. Well,
So
That went fast.
Yeah,
Seriously.
that was pretty interesting. Thank you very much, all, and thanks for all the comments. It's been really, really great. Yeah, I'm exhausted now.
I feel like we're just getting warmed up here.
Yeah.
And closing comments from someone? That's not.
yeah. Now we know how owners feel.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's so many moving parts.
I just a thought for future discussion. I think we need to talk a little bit more about the gap in IT and OT again at some point. Just listening to you guys talk, the first thing that always happens on every project is, oh, we got to go talk to IT first. Right. And there's no trust. There's no, I don't trust that's too simple of a way, but you know what I mean? That gap there is just holding us back, everybody in this industry, I think.
I agree. That's one of my hot topics, Tracy. And I think something that Steve just said to me, which I didn't realize, is IT guys have as much challenge the other way, right? When they get asked to do things. So it's a bi-directional problem.
Right.
No.
Okay. All right. That's great. That'll be a great subject for another show. So Thank you all.
Engineering
Video
code.
will be up in the morning, and have a great week, and see you next week. Bye.
Hey, guys.
Bye.
See you guys later. Bye.